So, welcome to the first episode of Breaking the Stigma with Chloe Fox. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about men suffering with eating disorders. And I have Owen Carrick with me today. Hi, Owen, how are you?
Hello, Chloe. I'm good. Good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be involved in this project.
No, it's great to have you on. So I just wanted to kind of get started with your story, basically. So can you kind of just walk us through your experience with your eating disorder, what actually went on, and your road to recovery, basically?
Yeah, so when I was 15, I was always like a larger kid. And so I came off holiday and my parents just sat me down and said, look, Owen, you need to try and lose a little bit of weight. It was nothing horrible. It wasn't like, oh, you've got to lose weight or anything bad like that. It was literally just for my own health, I guess. Lose a couple of pounds and, you will be in a better place. And yeah, so I played a lot of football and cricket. I was really active. So if I just cut out sugary foods and I ate a bit more healthy, I would end up losing the weight that I needed to be at a healthy weight, which is all it was. So I agreed to go on like a diet. It was nothing big. It was nothing like 200 calories a day or anything like that. It was literally just cut out sugary foods, and the sport and exercise you're currently doing will get you down to a lower weight. And yeah, that was that. And so obviously, as I mentioned, I played a lot of football, cricket, and being the larger kid, I always finished last in the fitness drills, the races, the sprints. And obviously, once I started this diet, I started running, I started eating better. And gradually, over a period of probably 2 or 3 months, those kids that were beating me in the fitness drills, I was beating them. I was quicker, I was stronger, I was faster. And yeah, I managed to get down probably within 4 months. I got down to a decent weight, a healthy weight. And obviously that's when the diet should have stopped. I could have gone back to eating like a normal 15-year-old, 15/16-year-old. And obviously, hence this podcast episode, it didn't stop there. If anything, it kind of got worse. So when I was dieting and just lose a couple of pounds, my average meal probably looked like, so I'd have breakfast like Weetabix or like crunchy nuts, something like that. Then I'd have like an orange or some piece of fruit on the way to the bus. Then I would have dinner, which would be like a sandwich or something like that, and some crisps, and then tea. And obviously, if I had anything in between, then that would be, if I was hungry, I would just eat. And obviously, if I did football or cricket, I would eat a sugary snack before I went, because obviously I was burning it off.
So kind of balanced at that point then.
Yeah. And obviously, with the eating disorder, after I got down to a healthy weight, I started cutting stuff out. So I wouldn't eat breakfast. And then so I'm not eating breakfast, and I'm walking from my house to the bus stop at 16 years old, which is about 25-minute walk.
Oh, wow, okay.
And then on literally like an empty stomach. And then the piece of fruit I was having on the way to the bus stop, I stopped eating. So then I was going from having my tea the previous night to the morning to like lunchtime at school without fully eating, which was probably around about like 12 hours without eating more probably. So yeah, that was tough. And then obviously I started cutting out dinner. So I was literally going from waking up at 7 o'clock, then doing the entire school day. And bearing in mind, this was like when I was doing my exams and stuff. So, that was like an incredibly stressful time. And so I was going from like 7 o'clock in the morning to 5-6 o'clock without eating. And yeah, so I started losing more weight because the exercise started becoming more frequent. So alongside football, cricket, I started running, doing cross country. So yeah, I was losing weight, and my parents started to get a bit like concerned about it. So my mum booked me an appointment with the GP, and he weighed me, did my BMI, and basically said that I was underweight and obviously I needed to put weight on. So I had like a repeat appointment with the doctor every month, to just keep a check on my weight, to make sure I wasn't losing too much. And probably within 3 months, these meetings had gone from monthly to every 2 weeks, then to every week. And then there was a point where it was like every couple of days.
Wow.
because I was literally just losing that much weight because what I mentioned earlier, I literally just wasn't eating.
So was
Uh,
this was that the decision of your doctor? Was that of your mum?
uh, yeah, it was like a bit of both, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah, it was kind of both. You know, my mum was really worried, and obviously because
Mm,
there's not a lot of information out there, my parents were clueless on what to do.
yeah.
Was the best policy to just leave it and just let me find out when I needed to eat or when I was going to get better? Was it their job to kind of step in and, lead me down the doctor's line?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was incredibly hard for my family, but they did a ridiculously brilliant job
I think
looking
that's a
after me.
common problem as well, isn't it? I mean, you find with a lot of people, unfortunately, there's just not enough, like you said, information or awareness in general around eating disorders at all. Especially, back when we were kids and back when, I know people older that had absolutely nothing. So it's only just getting to a point now where I feel there's any sort of awareness around it. So when your parents or, loved ones are trying to help you, they really have no idea what to do. So it's kind of it's guesswork really, isn't it?
It is, yeah, and it's a catch-22 because obviously I know you've suffered with your eating. What it might have helped you might have been the worst thing in the world for
Yeah.
me. So it's one
Yeah,
of those where everyone is just, so individual,
it is.
and that's the hardest part about your mental health.
Mm,
When you have a common cold, you go 2 or 3 days, you have some paracetamol, and usually you feel better. Whereas
mm.
with your mental health, one day you might be fine, 1 week you might be fine, 1 month you might be fine, but the next day you wake up, it can completely be different, and
Yeah.
that's the unpredictability of mental health.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has different triggers, don't they, at the end of the day? Like, I know your eating disorder was primarily just not eating. And for me, it was bulimia. So it became an addiction like the not eating did because you wanted to keep losing that weight. For me, it was, even though I wanted to be skinnier, it was more the fact it got to a point where because I was so used to making myself sick, it got to the point where when I didn't, even just for a little snack, it was kind of like it was as if I was an alcoholic that needed their next drink, and it was really difficult. I'd get really stressed, so it's difficult. And one thing that I want to highlight as well, and you touched on it there, it's mental health. And one thing I always say is eating disorders aren't something, it's not a light switch that you just suddenly switch on one day. So every person that has one has got an underlying reason or mental health problem that's likely caused it later down the line. Like there's a lot of people, especially, well, I can say from my perspective, at school, I know there were a lot of girls that would try and lose weight, but not all of them had eating disorders, whereas I wanted to lose weight and I ended up with an eating disorder. And it's because the way we view things and the way we are generally. So for me, it was an underlying body dysmorphic disorder, and that's for most people with eating disorders, and it's really hard to kick. And I used the analogy of the funhouse mirrors because it's so true. When you look at yourself in a funhouse mirror, you look all distorted, sorry, and even though other people don't see you like that, that's what we see in our heads, or we saw in our heads all of the time. So it's quite a hard thing to just kick. You can't just stop it.
Yeah, 100% agree, and the funhouse mirrors is, yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of your recovery then, so you started to touch on it, but so you were going to the doctors quite regularly at this point. And I know you've previously mentioned to me that in terms of recovery, support was quite difficult because like you've already said, it was a catch-22 situation where you kind of don't really, you want what one thing works for you won't work for me. So how did you find, in terms of your recovery, the support you had through different services like the NHS? Not knocking the NHS, of course, but it's a difficult one, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously, I think what you've got to kind of think about as well, when I was going through, the NHS counselling service, which is CAMS for like eating disorders, this was like 5 or 6 years ago, so it might be completely different now.
Yeah.
And obviously they have helped a lot of people because, you see a lot of good stories out there, and, for the people they've helped, that is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah,
But for
definitely.
me, unfortunately, I had a very negative experience with CAMS.
Mhm.
So I was referred, and the wait list was probably around 6 months.
Mhm.
And with the weight I was kind of projected to lose, I wouldn't be here in 6 months.
Yeah. Okay.
which is a kind of a bad sign to start with.
Yeah.
So I managed to get kind of fast tracked within probably 3 or 4 months, which is still not good enough, but I guess that's a conversation for another day, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I got into CAMS, and CAMS said to me, they like weighed me, they checked me out, and they said, right, you can go down a route of finding out why you have an eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, just at that time, I didn't want to go down that route. I was 16 years old. I was all over the place. I had my exams.
Mm-hmm.
I was stressed. At that moment of time, I just wanted to talk to someone. I just wanted to talk to like a professional. Because although my parents weren't there for me and they were brilliant, they gave me loads of reassurance.
Mm-hmm.
I deep down knew that they weren't like professional. So talking to someone who was actually trained in this specific field would have really helped me. So I said, look, like, I don't want to go down the route of finding out why. Like, at this moment in time, I don't feel like I'm ready to do that. And I said, look, can I come every month, every 6 months, every week, however much time you'll have me? Can I come and just talk to you? We can do like a diet plan. We can talk, and like, I think that would really help me. And they turned around to me and said that like, that's not something that they can currently offer. And yeah, so that was just my experience with kind of CAMS.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was just extremely negative. So from there, I kind of obviously carried on losing weight, and my doctor, who was absolutely amazing throughout it, the kind of, not turning point, but like an experience I really like remember in quite a blurred time, is I went to the doctor's one night, and my mum was sat there, my doctor was sat there, and they were literally just like, my mum was literally crying her eyes out, saying, look, at Owen, if you don't start eating, then you will literally not make it to Christmas. And this was probably around September time.
Okay.
And that fear, that moment, that sadness by my mum crying is just something that I think will always kind of like stick with me. And I don't think that was the turning point, but that was the point where I kind of thought, look, I'm going to have to at least try. And obviously, as someone who's recovered from an eating disorder, it's not, the next day you wake up and you start eating again, because it's absolutely not like that.
No.
This like recovery had many bumps in the road, and probably it's probably literally only the last 6 months where my eating has actually improved. So yeah, that's like a recovery of about 5-6 years. And yeah, that's kind of like a prominent image and moment, I guess, in my journey.
Yeah, I mean, things like that. I had a similar experience, and it's not one thing. I mean, you have all of these scary things that happen to you that should, in essence, they should make you kind of want to stop sooner. But it's until you have one pivotal moment, you find that that's the time you want to turn things around, more, not just for your own health, but for the sake of other people. I mean, for me, obviously, I wanted to get better, and I knew that was important to me, but it sounds silly, but I guarantee, and you might have felt the same, you care a little bit less about yourself in those situations. No matter what, you still have this image that's hard to shake, and you don't really care too much, which is sad to say. When you're deep in it, you don't care too much about how it's affecting your health until you see how it's affecting someone you love. And I think for me as well, it was my partner. So it was up until I was only just seeing my partner at this point. I'm still with him now. And we were a few months into our relationship, and it was kind of a point for me where I kind of realized how much I love this person. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to get to a point where he's having to look after me in hospital. I don't want to and I was hiding these things from him because I was ashamed. And that was a huge thing, because, very few people in my life knew about it. And the ones that did made me feel ashamed of it. So it wasn't something I was very open to sharing with people. He did end up finding out just before kind of I'd got out of it. But I just realized, I really love this person. I don't want him to be having to look after me all the time. I want to get to the point where I have choices where, I don't know if I want kids, but if I want kids, I don't want to be affected by that. Because the fact is, I was already at the point where it was affecting my hormones and things like that. And if I'd carried on, it may have been the fact that I couldn't have kids. So I didn't want that option taken away from him or me if, say, when I'm in my late 30s, I decide I want one, because, I've been very open to say I don't really want kids, but that's just because of my upbringing more than anything. But yeah, that was a pivotal point for me. And, you know, he helped me a lot, even though it wasn't seeing him upset. It was the realization that I love this person and I want to make myself better for them. And he helped me a lot when I was first coming out of it. You know, like I had a bit of a rule, and it becomes, like I said, obsessive. It was a 15-minute rule. So after I'd eaten, if after 15 minutes I hadn't been to gone to the toilet, I knew that realistically it'd be harder to get anything up. So after 15 minutes, I'd always make sure that I'd gone to the toilet and got rid of whatever I was eating. And it got to the point where he'd sit with me and he'd distract me for a good hour before after we'd eaten, just to make sure that I wasn't going to do anything that he knew I didn't want to do. So, you know, luckily in the end I had a bit of support, and I was already trying to get out of it at this point, but I think that little bit of support from someone I loved and I wanted to do it for made it a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, I think that's class. That a 15-minute rule, you know, it's brilliant. And obviously if anyone else is in the same, you know, position, you know, I would encourage them to maybe reach out, or maybe, you know, tailor that to them. But it seems a really, really good coping strategy, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, at the time it was more you know, I just knew, because I'd always done it. I think subconsciously I knew I had to go to the toilet within 15 minutes. Otherwise, it would be harder for me to get anything up. So when I realized that was the case and it clicked, oh my God, I'm going to the toilet at least 10, 15 minutes. You know, I won't leave it longer than that. I was like, I need to start making sure that for at least half an hour, I'm not going anywhere near the toilet, because it's kind of like a breaking point where I was like, do you know what? Once I've gotten that far, I can go further than that without doing it. So, you know, I think it was a good strategy, and I started it off on my own, and I was lucky enough that in the end, when I finally really got over it, not fully, like I said, there's always bumps in the road, but my partner kind of helped me in those moments. But yeah, it's different for everyone. I mean, for you, like you said, it was the not eating. I think for me, it was the bulimia. Obviously, I was terrible with over exercising. I tried everything. I dabbled in loads of things I shouldn't have. I used laxatives. I was using a corset, a steel bone corset around my waist 24 hours a day. I'd only take it off when I was going for a shower. And, you know, bit by bit, I got rid of all of these little things, but it was the bulimia, which was the real addiction that took so long to get over. And I think that's the same for anyone with an eating disorder. It's getting over it. And it's not as easy, like you said, of just turning it off one day. It's kind of, you're having to wean yourself off, in essence, you know, and it's a process. And for some people, it takes longer than others. I think it depends how long you've been in, you know, the situation, and also the support you have around you. And, you know, luckily for you, you had your mum who, well, she sounds like an amazing support system. I mean, like I said, in the end, I had my partner and I had my adopted mum. So she was really helpful as well once she finally knew about it. But my biological family were completely different. So it took me a while to get that support. And luckily you were able to go to the doctors with it. And I think your mum, in my opinion, from what you've told me, was kind of the pivot point for you in many ways. For first, you getting help at all. I think without her, you wouldn't have. And then obviously in the end, she was the reason that you got out of it, which is amazing, really.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
So one thing I want to touch on as well. So obviously, we already know that eating disorders anyway, they're generally not well spoken about. There's not a lot of awareness around them. And this is why I'm doing this podcast. I think breaking the stigma around eating disorders is extremely important to make open conversations more accessible and easier for people who are struggling, because as we both know, it's a really hard thing to talk about until, you know, we're both out of it now, so we can look at it in hindsight. But there's people who go through it and they'll just close off and they won't speak to anyone and be open with family, friends, anyone that could support them. But in terms of men struggling with eating disorders, I think even though across the board it's not easy, I think for men it can be 10 times harder, because, you know, a lot of people tend to look at eating disorders as something women do because they're not happy with the way they look and they see things on social media or models in magazines. And, you know, they feel like that's why people have an eating disorder. But obviously that's not the same for men. And, you know, the fact they may look at different people and feel bad about themselves, that could be the case, but it's not widely spoken about, and if anything, I feel like there's more of the stigma around men who suffer. So what's your experience with that in general? And can I ask, do you know anyone at all, or did you know when you were going through it, any other men that were suffering with this?
Um, I didn't know anyone when I was suffering, obviously, because when I was suffering, I didn't tell anyone.
Mhm.
So my closest mates who I was spending every day with at school for years and years didn't even know. And obviously, since I've kind of become public with it, I guess,
Mhm.
like they've reached out and said, look, Owen, like I had no idea you were kind of going through this.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I guess it like links into like hiding it.
Mhm.
And yeah, so no, I didn't actually know anyone who was suffering. Obviously, with like going a bit more public with it, I've had people reach out and say, look, you know, I've struggled with this or I struggle with that. But
Mhm.
like an actual physical eating disorder, then no, I haven't actually heard from anyone.
Yeah.
I think as well, because there's not a lot out there, you know, social media,
Mhm.
television, stuff like that, you do go to bed feeling very alone.
Yeah.
Obviously, as we touched on earlier, there's not a lot out there for either gender,
Yeah.
but there is just physically nothing out there. You know, I would lay in bed at night thinking, am I the only person in this world suffering from this?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's really important to get that information to the right people as well.
Mhm.
Obviously, now I'm 22 and I'm on LinkedIn and everything else. You know, there's a lot of amazing people out there helping with eating
For
disorders.
sure. Yeah.
But but as a 16-year-old guy, or any gender,
Mhm.
I physically didn't know about these charities. And I know it sounds so like naive to say, oh, you didn't know there was an eating disorder charity, you didn't know there was help out there.
Mm.
Because I didn't see it in
Yeah.
school, or I didn't see anyone else going through it, I physically didn't know that they were out there.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you type eating disorder into Google, you probably come up with a few charities. And
Yeah.
I
Of
did
course.
like kind of look into that. But in terms of like individuals who will help, or like smaller charities, it's about getting that information into schools. It's about getting it into
Yes.
the hands of the right people so they can make a difference. Because if I had have known about them, maybe my journey would have what would have been different,
Yeah,
perhaps.
definitely. And I think that's massively, well, I'd say the responsibility of schools as well, because I had the same experiences in there was nothing, it's not, don't get me wrong, I don't think I'd want to see posters everywhere about, eating disorder charities. I doubt that would have made me feel much better. But yeah, I think with the schools, I think they have a big responsibility in terms of helping younger people, or just offering support. Like we already know that schools have, they have like a counselor or something along those lines. But did they really offer advice in terms of this? I know, I mean, I went between a few schools when I was younger. I went to one counselor after my dad passed away in my first secondary school. And honestly, it was an experience that I'd never want to go back to. And that might have just been the individual circumstance. A lot of school counselors and things like that, they work really hard. But that one for me in particular, just again, it was a different situation. But it wasn't a safe space. And I think being able to create those safe spaces is really important for younger people, especially men, because it's such a taboo subject anyway. But for men, it's like, the whole men don't cry thing. It's just another level to that, because people wouldn't think a man, or at school it would be like a lad or something like that would go through something as serious as this, which it is serious. It's the same as any other mental problem like depression. It causes depression in the long run. I know I went through it. So, I think having safer spaces, and I think schools need to look at that and then offer things like, the charities like Beat and things like that, which again, I knew nothing about until I Googled myself. And when you're in the situation, you can Google it, but that doesn't mean you're going to do anything with it because you don't understand it. And why would you reach out? Because you don't feel comfortable. So I think that's a huge thing in terms of schools, and is a really important point that you've touched on. So just to finish off as well, I don't know if you know about anything in terms of the improvement in terms of support, but do you feel in any way that any support has improved over time? I know, like you mentioned on LinkedIn, and I'm the same, we found a kind of community, and that's what encouraged me to start this, of people who have reached out to both of us since we've been open and said, look, I also suffer with this, or I did suffer with this, and they relate or really appreciate what we've shared. So that in itself is support. And again, this is why I've started this podcast. But do you feel that there's anything now that's better than when you were going through what you're going through as a man, suffering with an eating disorder?
I think it's definitely getting better. I'm not sure if it has gotten better because obviously when I was suffering, I wasn't on LinkedIn, I wasn't on other social sites. So it might have been there for years. But honestly, I think we are a very, very long way off where we need to be. People are still going to suffer in silence. People are still going to go to school not talking about it. Men, women, we're all just going to keep quiet because we don't see enough mainstream mainstream coverage on eating disorders. There's just not enough out there, and we have a very, very long way to go. And fingers crossed, like podcasts like this one, social posts, and us being the generation to lead the change so people don't feel as alone will help. But in terms of is there currently enough out there? No, I don't think there is, and I do feel as though we are a long way off.
Yeah, I agree. And like you said, I think it's conversations like the one we're having now and the awareness that we're bringing, not just on here, but through social media sites. And hopefully it'll get to the point where it's more widespread and will help people feel open to having conversations about this, not just after the fact. But I think the whole aim is to making sure that people are comfortable to have those conversations during what they're going through. And that's going to depend on a lot of different factors, unfortunately, but at least this awareness can not only help those suffering, but it can kind of educate those who know someone, say a family member that's going through it. Like you mentioned, your mum, she did her best to help you, but there wasn't enough information to kind of guide her on what to do. So hopefully things like this can kind of help people on the road to helping others as well as helping themselves. But yeah, that was amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Owen. I appreciate it. That was awesome. Thank you for sharing a story with me.
Yeah, it's honestly been brilliant. Thank you so much, Chloe. And yeah, thank you.